Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you, those of you who have responded to the questions that I asked, just to confirm that you can hear us. We do have you muted right now, so you won't be able to speak, but there will be a couple times during the webinar where we will unmute you, and we will be able to kind of talk back and forth at that point in time. If you've never done one of these before, you do have a couple options that you should see on your little control panel. You can raise your hand, which will get our attention, and we will then try to respond to your question or your message that you send us. You can send a little message in the chat feature as well, and you can just ask a question as well. So there's a variety of ways that you can communicate with us. Hopefully, you are able to hear us loud and clear at this point. If you aren't, please let us know through one of those messages that you can send us. Let me get started today and talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. We're doing something a little bit different today. We always have a webinar of some kind associated with the event Waste Reduction Grant. This year, we're going to try two different webinars. The focus today, we are going to talk a little bit about the eligibility for this grant, but we're going to focus most of our time today trying to share with you some of the other events that we have issued grants for in the past, and then also sharing some best practices for event waste reduction, recycling and composting, and then finally just really allow for some questions and some idea sharing. The idea today is mostly if you're somebody who has never applied for one of these grants before, or maybe you've never done waste reduction at your event, and you have some ideas or some thoughts and you just aren't sure whether the waste reduction grant is right for you, it's an opportunity to engage with us, share some ideas, get some feedback. And then we'll have a second webinar that we'll talk about at the end. We'll dig in a little bit more to the actual application process. So with that, I am going to introduce myself. My name is Andrew Booker. I'm the programs manager at SWACO. You won't hear much from me today. You'll mostly hear from Christy and Amy, and I'm going to hand it over to Christy and Amy to say hi.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. This is Christy Higginbotham. I'm a programs administrator at SWACO. I'm responsible for administering our grant programs as well as our school programs. I've been with SWACO for 20 years now. And again, as Andrew had mentioned, I'll be discussing the eligibility, application requirements, and I'll share with you a little bit more about our past awardees and the activities that were funded. And now I'll turn it over to Amy to share a little bit about herself.
Thank you, Christy. My name is Amy Densmore, and I focus on educating our youth and residents about the importance of waste reduction and recycling, as well as conducting all of the landfill tours. Today, I'll be going over a little bit more about SWACO's container loan program, as well as technical systems that we can help offer you to your events. So go ahead and continue on, Christy.
Thanks, Amy. And just so you're aware, I'll be your contact should you have any questions after the webinar. As you're looking through the information, please do not hesitate to reach out to me with any additional questions or concerns you may have following this presentation. So SWACO's grants program consists of two grant offerings. The one that we are focused on today is the Event Waste Reduction Grant Program. The application posted in December of 2019. The deadline to apply is, there's a typo there. Please make note of it. It should be March 13th, 2020. And I will clarify that in an email follow-up to you all as well. Our other grant program that we offer is our Community Waste Reduction Grant Program. And that will post a little bit earlier this year for those of you that have applied in the past. It will begin in June of 2020, and the deadline to apply for that program will be sometime in August 2020. So these programs, they fall under the purview of our Innovation and Programs Department, which Andrew, Amy, and I are all part of. We're focused on building collaborative partnerships that impact and improve the waste stream, leverage the waste stream for economic benefit, and contribute to a safe and healthy community. So as Andrew mentioned, the goal for today's presentation is to provide more insight with respect to the Event Waste Reduction Grant Program. And really the purpose of this program is to provide reimbursement funding for activities that increase reuse, recycling, and composting, as well as diversion-related outreach and education activities at public events. So in the next few slides, I will cover some eligibility and application requirements, and we'll roll into that right now. So we just want to make you aware that this is a competitive grant program. Applications are scored by an internal SWACO review committee and weighted against one another. And our evaluation committee is made up of representatives from our legal, finance, and innovation and programs departments. So after the deadline, I'll compile all of the applications, and then our committee will convene to talk about them. In order for an application to be evaluated by our committee, there are some fundamental criteria that must be met. And those are that the program activities must occur in the 2020 calendar year and be open to the public. If your event charges an admittance fee, that's okay. It just can't be an invitation-only event. If this is a new event that you are hosting, you need to be able to show that your anticipated attendance is at least 2,000 people. It's also important to note that this is a reimbursement grant program, so award recipients will receive grant dollars upon receipt and approval of a final report, which is due 4 weeks following the event. Events that are eligible are events that occur in SWACO's jurisdiction. So in case you are not aware, SWACO is a public entity in one of 52 solid waste management districts in the state. We have a specific jurisdiction or service area with boundaries. Our jurisdiction is comprised of primarily Franklin County and includes the cities of Canal, Winchester, Dublin, New Albany, Reynoldsburg, and Westerville. So the map here on the slide shows Pickerington and parts of Lysopolis, but these communities are outside of our jurisdiction since the majority of their boundary lines are outside of Franklin County. So it's important to know this because the event does have to occur within our boundary lines in order to be eligible. And then just quickly, we'll talk a little bit about the eligible use of funds here. So you can apply for items related to equipment, professional services, and supplies. So equipment could be anything from durable, reusable, recycling containers and or composting containers, even different types of sorting equipment. Professional services, there are a few consultants in town that do provide services relating to providing waste assessments and waste audits. Those types of services would be eligible, as well as the reduction or diversion of materials with a hauler. And I should add that it cannot be an existing contract that you've already executed with a hauler for recycling or composting services. If this is a new service, those types of professional services would be eligible as well. And then with respect to supplies, it could be anything from materials for education and outreach and awareness activities to informational booths, banners, or other types of promotional items relating to the reuse and diversion that you are implementing at the event. So next I'll share a little bit with you about our application requirements. As I noted earlier, there was a typo in that second slide. The deadline to apply is March, not May 13th, 2020 by 5 p.m. And at this time you would need to provide us with your application and the supporting documentation that is required. And this will need to be submitted on time and without missing information. Additionally, applications must be submitted by the organization responsible for implementing the event. So we cannot accept applications submitted on your behalf by a consultant or contractors or vendors or unaffiliated individuals. I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is a reimbursement grant. So again, if you are awarded, we will provide the awarded dollars after the event and the final report has been received and approved. We will enter into an agreement which outlines the grant-approved activities and deliverables, and the agreement must be executed prior to the purchase of any approved grant items. So it would be considered executed once you have signed the agreement and SWACO has signed the agreement. And at that point, we would give you the go-ahead to begin purchasing your items. A 25% cash match is required as part of this program, and that we ask for detail on that in your budget form that you will submit with your application. And if you've received a SWACO grant in the past, please keep in mind that funding cannot be awarded for the same program activities or purchases as previously provided. That said, applicants requesting funding for the expansion or improvement of an existing program will be considered. However, we do request that sufficient detail regarding how the program will be improved upon and or expanded is provided. Oops, let me back up again. Sorry, I didn't finish my thought here. The other thing that I don't want to fail to mention is that requests for existing programs or services, again, cannot be considered. And so I had mentioned some examples of those. If you're already paying for somebody to come and pick up your recycling, that would not be eligible. That said, if you aren't paying someone to come pick up recycling and or composting, that is an eligible expense. Solid waste or trash hauling expenses are ineligible. And in terms of the grant funding that is available, it ranges between $2,000 and $6,000. They're tied to the event attendance. So beginning with events that have at least 2,000 attendees, ranging between 2,000 and 10,000 attendees, those events are eligible to receive up to $2,000. Events ranging from 10,000 to 30,000 are eligible to request up to 4,000, and events ranging from 30,000 to events ranging from 30 to 60,000 attendees can request up to $6,000 in funding. So now I'm just going to jump in a little bit to some of our past award recipients. I'm going to start with the larger events that have received funding and provide you with a little bit of information in terms of what that funding was for. Highball Halloween received funding to assist in developing a plan for waste reduction and diversion that they could follow year after year. And they share this with their volunteers. It also included dollars to produce training materials to help their volunteers implement a successful recycling program. Dollars were also provided to provide hauling for recyclables as well as reusable signage. The Columbus crew received funding for the Rock on the Range event. They purchased 75 Clearstream recycling containers. You'll see pictures of those later on in the presentation if you haven't, or if you're not familiar with what those look like. A lot of events utilize these containers for a number of reasons, which Amy will discuss. And then the Dublin Irish Festival also received funding for Clearstream containers. They received funding for 50 through SWACO, and then they purchased an additional 400 recycling and landfill containers with lids for their event. So some of our past awardees that had attendees between 10 and 30,000 included Compost, the Columbus Coffee Festival, and the Columbus Food Truck Festival. Compost already had Clearstream recycling containers, but they had a really hard time deploying them and collecting them before and after the event. What is nice about the Clearstream containers is that you can also buy transport carts that you can stack the containers and the lids on. And so they received funding for these transport carts along with funding for improved signage. The Columbus Coffee Festival received funding for signage, banners, and for the development of a recycling and compost informational display. They also received some funding for their recycling collection services. And the Columbus Food Truck Festival also received funding for Clearstream containers with signage for compost and recycling. And they were one of our first events that were approved for funding to purchase feather sails. And what we have learned from that event in 2016 is that these feather sails are a really nice way to highlight your waste reduction stations and to draw attention to them. And so that's something that we have funded since then as well. And then for our past awardees with an attendance between 2,000 and 10,000 attendees, that includes Franklinton Farms, Festival for Good, and Our Lady of Perpetual Help. So Franklinton Farms received funding for zero waste disposal stations, and that includes one recycle, one compost, and one landfill container at each with lids. They provided the compostable serviceware that was at their event, and also instruction for the attendees on how to dispose of these items properly. Festival for Good received funding to hire a consultant to assess their waste stream, and so this is a relatively new event, and they were really trying to get a handle on how much waste they were producing, but then also how much of that waste created could have been recycled, compost, or reduced through changing purchasing practices. And so the consultant came in and sorted the material generated at this event and provided them with a report following the event so that they can implement some sustainable strategies for future events. And then Our Lady of Perpetual Help received dollars to also implement a zero waste program at their community parish festival. They also purchased feather sails, banners, and Clearstream compost containers. They had already had the existing recycle and landfill containers. And so a lot of planning really went into this event for them. They created a care council well in advance of the event to ensure that they were able to incorporate best management practices necessary to achieve zero waste. And then they also created 8 zero waste disposal stations with volunteers at each station throughout the course of their 2-day event to ensure that attendees understood what their goals were, but then also to ensure that they were collecting a clean recycling stream as well as a clean compost stream. And in addition, they took it a step further and worked with all of their food vendors and included language in their contracts that required the food vendors to use certified compostable materials and recyclable serving materials as well. And then I'll just close with saying that we worked really closely with all of these events in sharing best management practices, but also in developing accurate signage for all of these containers. SWACO really is a subject matter expert in terms of what is accepted and not accepted, and we've piloted a lot of programs and a lot of different types of signage. And so with all of our grant recipients, we work closely to help you meet your goals and divert as much waste as you can from these events. And so with that, we are going to stop for just a second. Andrew has...
I have, this is Andrew again. Elizabeth, you had raised your hand. I think maybe you have a question. I'm going to try to unmute you, so give me a second.
I accidentally raised my hand. I don't have anything to say. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No worries, no worries. I'll meet you again. But let's pause. Before we get into best management practices, I do want to let anybody that has a question for Christy about any of those different grant projects to raise your hand, ask a question, and I can unmute you. You can talk on the phone. As you heard from Christy, there's a variety of things that we can issue grant funding for. It can be development of a plan. It can be for containers. It can be for services. So there's a wide variety of things that we have granted in the past. So let me just pause for a minute and see if there's anybody else. I've got everybody muted, so if you'd like to ask a question, you'll have to send me a chat or raise your hand or do something to let me know. And if you don't know how to do that, you've got a little control panel, should be on the right-hand side of your screen typically, where you're going to have some ability to communicate. Okay, well, let's continue then.
Okay, so next we're going to turn it over to Amy to talk a little bit more about best management practices and strategies.
Thank you, Christy. So now that you know more about the grant funding process and previous awardees, we want to introduce some best management practices to help make your event waste reduction successful at your event. So to help increase visibility of the waste disposal stations, you may want to borrow one of SWACO's recycling feather sails. We have two that you can borrow, or you can request grant dollars to have these customized feather sails designed for your event. Previous grant awardees, such as Our Lady of Perpetual Help and the Columbus Food Truck Festival mentioned before, did just that with their grant funding dollars. And they're able to use those feather sails year after year to help increase visibility of the waste disposal station. Let's discuss how to communicate your hard work to your attendees through announcements at the event and or prior website presence. Detailing to your attendees some of the tips on how to be more sustainable event guests. You don't need to develop an app or anything fancy to get the information you want across in a waste-free format. We all know printing costs can add up fast, and so can the amount of natural resources used to print guidebooks or other items. It's important to engage attendees about your commitment to implementing successful waste reduction activities. They are part of a team and is going to contribute to your success. So inviting guests to help make the event more eco-friendly is critical. For example, marketing prior to the event can encourage attendees to bring their own cup, bag, bottle, or utensils as an example. For the whole time limit of the event, consider how to leverage social media and press releases to tell your eco-event story. Tag us at SWACO Green for some guaranteed social media love. As annoying as it is, without a Facebook post, it never happens. Now that you've worked so hard advertising and promoting your green initiatives at your events, we need to think about the logistics of how many containers you will need at your venue to ensure waste stations don't overflow and that participants don't have to hunt down the proper container. We will talk more about this in the detail in the slides ahead. Whether you are hosting a food truck festival or a 5K run, you will want to make sure you have the correct corresponding color lids with labels on each container. For example, the green lids are for compostable materials such as food scraps and certified compostable products. When purchasing certified compostable products for your event, you should always look for the Biodegradable Products Institute or BPI logo, indicating that the product has been tested and verified to break down at a commercial compost facility within 90 days. Green should always be used for compostables, blue for recycling, and black for landfill. Please do not defer from the universal color codes, as it can add a lot of unnecessary confusion for your attendees. If you're planning to use a compost service to divert your food waste and other compostable products, it is critical to include proper signage to help educate your attendees about which container to properly dispose of your items. We will go into further detail about proper signage in the next slide. And don't fear, all this information can be accessed at a later time and can be found in SWACO's Best Management Practice Guide. There is a link at the bottom of this slide to help access later after the webinar. So now we want to talk about signage. We briefly touched on that before, but this is an example of what signage looks like in practice above your waste stations. So why do you think we put the landfill sign at the far right? We read from left to right, so the least preferred option, landfilling, should be the last one guests read. Please always feel free to reach out to our team with recycling designs or info you plan to share via signage or on your website to ensure that it's accurate. For example, last year I worked with the sustainably-minded local brewery Wolf's Ridge to develop sorting signs for their anniversary party, which strive to be a zero waste event through composting and recycling most of their generated waste. Your signage can be designed to be durable and weatherproof, so they can be used at multiple events. This year, we are working on updating signage to be more sustainable and streamline the setup process for event organizers here in Franklin County. Additionally, consider how any signage you create, whether it's for containers, maps, or general marketing, can be made for reuse at future events. Removing dates from materials is one way to achieve this goal. So now that you have the recycled containers and verified your signage was accurate, the next step is to ensure that there are enough waste stations spread throughout the event so attendees don't have to go hunt down a waste disposal station. Waste reduction stations should be placed every 30 to 40 yards throughout the venue. This design will help people see bins no matter where they are in your event space. Some event organizers also purchase large feather sails, indicating recycling stations to help make it more visible. You don't want to hang out alone at the festival or event, and neither do your bins. Be sure to group them. This strategy increases diversion because many people will toss whatever they have into whatever bin they see if it's solo. When considering how many stations you may need for an event, physically draw out the space or venue and map out projected flow of people and the materials that they will be getting rid of. Also consider drawing out the collection areas or dumpsters. These estimates for how many bins you may need are pulled from the City of Columbus's Green Event Guide. Lastly, consider setting up some of your bins a day or so early, depending on how much setup is required. For example, a bike race or community festival may benefit from setting up bins the day before, since there will be many people on site setting up who may have recyclable materials such as Gatorade bottles. And now I believe I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew to open it up to see if there's any questions or any ideas that you guys want to share with us.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to try an experiment here and unmute everybody. We'll see if we get cross-talk interference, and if we do, I'll mute everybody back up, but let's just see how that goes. So far, that's not working. Let's just try that one more time. Okay, that doesn't work. So let me just do this manually then. I do want to, Sarah had a question earlier. I do want to share that with the group. Sarah had asked whether an event has to be a one-time event or could it be a weekly farmers market as an example. And it does not need to be a one-time event. It can be a reoccurring event. That's great, actually. So
I would just add that those events would need to meet the minimum attendance of at least 2,000.
Yes, good point. That's a good point. So with that, I am unmuting folks, and so I am hearing a little bit of background noise, and we'll see how that works. Does anybody have a question that they would like to share or a comment they would like to share?
Oh, that's what she worked at.
Yeah.
How's she doing? She was in there.
Okay, so I am not seeing any questions. I'm not seeing any. Looks like Elizabeth does have her hand raised.
I do have a question this time.
All right, excellent. We're very excited to hear what it is, Elizabeth.
Do you have signage that we can download and print off to use and maybe edit if necessary?
Amy, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, so we do have signage available on our website on the Container Loan Program webpage. They are PDFs, and so if you have Adobe Acrobat and you can make edits to them, you might be able to do that. And or you can reach out to us and we can help customize signs with you and we can work together closely.
Great, thank you.
Does anybody else have a question? Ellen, I actually re-muted you because I was getting a lot of noise from your end. So if you have a question, raise your hand or shoot me a chat and I'll unmute you again. And then Dominique and Sarah, I think you are both self-muted. So if you would like to speak, you're going to have to unmute from your end. Everybody else should be able to speak and we should all be able to hear you. So any other questions, comments, even just sharing of experiences that you've had with your event, please speak up. Okay, well, we're gonna then move on to the final section here on the event container loan program. If you're not familiar with this program, I'm gonna have Amy walk us through what it's all about.
Yeah, so if you're primarily interested in recycling bins, but you lack year-round storage or only need containers a few times a year, we have, excuse me, recovering from sickness. We have the Event Container Loan Program, which is a free program to events and festivals here in Franklin County. So SWACO operates the program and it allows the event organizers to borrow recycling, compost containers, and landfill containers. So through this program, event organizers hosting public events anywhere in Franklin County can borrow recycling and composting containers free of charge. Containers can be used for many different types of events, including small events in one room with 25 people, up to huge events that take place in public parks. So this program is very popular. For example, container loan events diverted over 32,000 pounds of recyclables and compostable materials in 2019. So we loan out Clearstream recycling, compost, and landfill containers. These are collapsible and easy to assemble. There is a picture included on this slide. We also provide sorting signage and 1 bag per container. Event organizers may request up to 150 recycling containers or 75 recycling and 75 landfill containers for their events. We also have 20 compost containers available for loan. Each bin, including the lid and frame, requires a deposit of $10. No portion of this deposit check is cashed if all bins are returned undamaged and clean, along with the final report which documents the amount of materials diverted from the landfill. So for example, if you have recycling offered at your event, you would need to keep track of the number of bags of recyclables that you took to the SWACO recycling drop-off location. If you rent over 100 containers, our team can work with you to arrange drop-off at your event during normal work hours. If a smaller number are borrowed, then our organizers are asked to pick up containers and drop them off at our office located in Grove City. When collapsed, these containers don't take up much space at all. For context, I can fit approximately 35 containers into my small Hyundai Elantra, or a compact car, if you will. If you've never offered recycling at your event in the past, the container loan program can be a good way to help get it started. However, if you're involved in established ongoing events and you know that you are committed to recycling into the future, I would still encourage you to apply for a grant and to establish a permanent, self-controlled waste diversion system for events that you can manage. More information on the container loan program can be found at swaco.org/CLP. You can also contact us directly for more information. Whether you are using the container loan program, the Event Waste Reduction Grant program, or both, you may have questions about how to recycle right at your event. Our container loan program webpage contains a link to a short pre-recorded webinar highlighting best management practices for event waste reduction. If you've ever wondered how many bins to set out at an event or whether bioplastics are eco-friendly, then you should watch our pre-recorded webinar and get your questions answered. In the webinar, we explore what items are accepted for recycling and what are not. For example, cups are not accepted for recycling in Franklin County, are commonly generated at events. You'll also learn how to write a vendor or hauler contracts to help maximize your recycling efforts, as well as how to track and share your success story at your events. You'll find event waste reduction guide on our webpage and other useful links with helpful information about the topic. Now it's back to Christy.
Thank you, Amy. So yeah, just in closing, we just have this last slide. We want to make sure that you're aware that we are having the second webinar as part of this series next Wednesday, February 12th. It will be at 11 a.m. and it will be approximately a half hour to 45 minutes. Again, as Andrew had mentioned earlier, we'll be focusing more on the application process, applicant eligibility, and eligible costs. If you have not yet downloaded, excuse me, our information application document, I encourage you to do so if you plan to attend this webinar. And if you can do it in advance and kind of read through it, it'll make it a lot easier for you to follow along, as well as maybe come prepared with some questions. And so if you just visit our Event Waste Reduction Grant webpage, you can register for the second webinar and also download that information application document. So that wraps it up for the information that we wanted to provide you with today. At this time, we're going to open it up again for any questions or comments or ideas that you'd like to share at this time.
Any final questions? And if you don't have any at the moment, but they pop into your head later today, tomorrow, or in the future, Christy is always available, and Amy as well. You've got the email right there, grants@swaco.org, and then you can call Christy directly as well to pick her brain, share an idea, get some advice on what will be a successful grant application. We appreciate your attendance today. I hope it was helpful, at least getting the wheels turning a little bit in terms of your event and your interest in submitting a grant application. As Christy said, if you are planning on submitting an application, and particularly if you've never done it in the past, the next email will kind of go almost page by page in terms of the grant application and the information you need to provide. So we encourage you to participate in that one as well. I'll pause for one more minute, see if there are any more questions, hands raised, or any of that. I don't think so. I think we're good. So thank you once again. Oh, I do have a question. Colleen asked, for the loan program, are we responsible for disposing of materials? That's a very good question. I will hand it back over to Amy to answer that.
Yes, so that is a great question. As the event organizer, you are responsible for disposing of the materials, whether those are recyclables, compostables, or the trash. So SWACO offers 55 different recycling drop-off stations throughout Franklin County. Those are free to the public and they're open 24/7. So if you have a smaller event, you might be able to figure out a way to truck the recyclables to one of our SWACO drop-off locations. If you're having a larger event, you're going to want to probably establish a contract with the recycling hauler to pick up the recyclables from your event. But we can certainly help you with that process as well.
And the same holds true for composting. So if you're interested in composting, you'll have to get a service provider, and we can help you identify those that are available.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yep. Let me see if there are any other questions. Are the public drop-offs for compost? And that answer is no. Those are just for recycling. But as indicated, there are some service providers who can do composting as well. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you for your attendance. If you have any further questions, grants@swaco.org or call Christy, and hopefully we'll be seeing some grant applications. So have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.